Retired Colonel Chris Budihas joins us. He is the host of First Coast Military Life. What do you have happening on the show this weekend, first of all?
This weekend, we got Dan Shinnok. He's coming over from Wounded Warrior Project. He's the community outreach coordinator over there. He's a U.S. Army veteran himself and doing great things at Wounded Warrior Project. A lot of awesome things going on over there. And last week on Fox News, or actually maybe 2 weeks ago now, General Retired Walt Pyatt was on there for a while. It was a great interview about what's happening in Wounded Warrior Project, how they're helping our families and veterans. And this, I always say, like, global war and terrorism war is actually continuing to this day, but they're doing a lot of amazing work over there.
For those who don't know what the Wounded Warrior Project is, just educate us a little bit. I find it difficult to believe that many people don't, but there are some people who don't know.
Yeah, so Wounded Warrior Project, born out of post 9/11 era. So essentially, some folks came together, created a nonprofit to help our wounded warriors get back into society. In some cases, it was physical injury or mental injury and such, and then they got into the business of helping out those, not just them, but also their families and others. So they do a lot of programs here, headquartered here in Jacksonville. We're very fortunate to have them here. They do a lot with not just the community here, but abroad, the nationwide, and support our current service members and their needs and their families' needs as a result of military service and injuries they may have received.
How big is the sacrifice that military families make?
Oh, my gosh. I always said my wife had the hardest job. I mean, you think about it, 36 years. She essentially raised 3 kids, kept me, because for your service member, when they're downrange, in a conflict and deployed, I mean, they're the ones that are keeping things steady at home. And, that's the one thing you want to make sure as a soldier, sailor, airman, guardian, whatever service you're in, is, hey, if your family's taken care of and everything is working out well, the stress you're having, for on the battlefield, for deployed is not as bad, right? It can complicate things. Unfortunately, I'm sure you've seen through your own service, people having marital issues of various kinds while you're deployed. It has not just a sense of stress on the individual, but it also stresses the organization, and in many cases can put the whole organization at risk if somebody's not switched on and got their head in the game. So it's extremely important. God bless our spouses out there that are out there sacrificing every single day to take care of their service members and then their children. All 3 of my children got 3 high schools, so I always told them, you got something to tell your therapist. So, I mean, I was pretty fortunate for my dad to be in the Navy his whole career, but I grew up in Orange Park. I moved here when I was 3, and I went to Orange Park High, and I didn't have to move for my kids to have to do that 3 different times. And by the way, Europe to the U.S. back and forth, that can be a lot of strain. Now, later on in their lives, in their late 20s, early 30s, they are very resilient. They make friends very well and such. So I guess there's a silver lining to that story. But
the teenage years are kind of touch and go. They're touch and go when both parents are there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and for single parents, there are lots of single parents in the military as well.
Absolutely. And that's a huge challenge there. And I don't think our civilian population probably even realizes the difficulty at which our single service members, the stresses they have to deal with daily of taking care of a child, having to deploy. Just because you're a single parent, with that, male or female, you have responsibilities and duties with an organization that you're in or assigned to, and you will continue to deploy and do all those other things. And the watch folks have to juggle all that, daycare in order to get the physical training. Think about workout, 6:30, and the Army's very religious about 6:30 PT. That's got a huge implications to, daycare. Think about daycare. When I was at Fort Benning as the chief of staff, that was one of the biggest complaints, was not enough daycare, and then sometimes not opening up early enough for the service member to drop off their child in order to get to their unit, in order to conduct PT, and then get back and do the things they have to do and pick up their child on a timely time. Because as we know in the military, you might have a clock, but it doesn't mean you're leaving at a certain time. So
absolutely, and you might not have to report in until 6, but that doesn't mean they expect you there any later than 5 a.m., right?
Amen.
So can you break down a little bit of what's happening in Iran right now to the extent that anyone can?
Can anybody?
There's a lot of information floating about, and we don't know, we don't have a lot of it confirmed, especially about Iran's claim this morning that an Amazon site was attacked.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Don't take out Amazon. It's interesting. So this morning I was listening to Foreign Policy Live podcast, and they had Nate Swanson on there. So Nate's been in both the Republican and the Democratic Party side of politics, but he's a Middle East expert, a lot of expertise in Iran specifically. And the thing that I thought was interesting, which we kind of know, but he brought to the surface, is both sides think they're winning. I mean, the Iranians think they're winning, really. Hey, we got the Strait of Hormuz. It's our new nuclear weapon. Actually, it might be even a bigger nuclear weapon than an actual nuclear weapon. And then the U.S., we're winning. We've taken out all their stocks. And then, I seen on, I don't scroll on social media that much because I know there's a lot of haters out there, Chase. So the funny thing is, people this weekend were like, wait a second, we were told there was no ballistic missiles. I mean, people were legitimate. There was people making fun of it, but there was people going, hey, I thought we were, they decimated their, she had long-range drone, capability and things of that nature. So it's funny to see the policy experts who've been in this business for a while. When you look at a negotiated settlement, you typically, you negotiate from a power of strength if you think you're winning, and I hate that term. Winning and victory are two words in our vocabulary in the military, and you just need to go away, is the fact that when both sides think they're winning, why should they negotiate? And so, I'm curious to see what happens. You go back to, the days of the Greeks and the Romans. Somebody's got to capitulate. Somebody's got to say no more, no mas, and this is the end. And then, terms are given and accepted. So what does that look like? And, I guess there's a big question for the president. We're just going to continue his air campaign and naval blockade. That's, again, I've said numerous times, there's only really two times in American history blockades have worked, and air campaigns rarely ever work. The Kosovo air war, if we want to call that a war in itself, that's one of the few times that's worked. Some folks out there right now are trying to say Libya, but I serve in Africa Command. Libya is a failed state. There's a lot of failed states out there, and let's say, just for hypothetically, we bomb them into submission and such. What does that mean? What does that mean if they become a failed state and to the rest of the region and the nation? So I just don't know what's going to happen, but somebody's got to capitulate, and the long-term repercussions on our economy, the global economy, and others is very it's concerning. The NATO summit 2 weeks ago, I'm not sure what came out of that other than a lot of, we're doing a great job type stuff. Glad, shaking hands, and this is awesome, but okay, thanks, NATO. What are you doing to help in this situation? So, and you can't blame them. If you put, I've served 7 years in Europe, you sit in their shoes, hey, America, you created this. So what are you going to do about it?
You brought this war to us.
Yeah. So what are you going to do about this? So it's a precarious time we're sitting in right now. Even if you changed, I read a lot on the left, the right, and the middle, and the center, and such, and there's all these hypothetical things, but here's the reality. Even if you say a change of administration, regardless of party, it's going to be something it's going to be hard. You can't put this genie back in a bottle.
So
truly.
This might be more of a political science question versus a military question.
I got a degree in that, by the way.
In political science.
Yeah. So I was probably more educated back then when I got that degree in '94 than a lot of our politicians. I've been listening. Like I said, when I work out and I go running, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and listen to the Sunday morning talk shows. Last weekend, it's scary. Some of our representative senators, I mean, they are totally uneducated on a lot of things, and foreign policy it's been highlighted to me that they do not understand what the dynamics are and long-term repercussions, and they're voting on these things. So, they keep complaining, hey, you bring, the president needs to bring this to Congress, which I totally agree about, and I believe that needs to happen. But golly, man, if you're voting, do a little bit of research. Stop.
Well, they have staffs to educate them on some of the stuff, and a lot of that is coming
Kristine,
out.
the irony is, I spent, and I won't get into this initiative I'm working right now, but a project, if you will. But I was on Capitol Hill a month ago, and the vast majority of every single staff that we talked to, their chief of staff was maybe early 30s. Their policy advisors, I think there was one that was over age 30, and the rest, they went to GW, they went to University of Florida. A lot of great Americans serving their political masters, or our political masters, if you will. But they're undereducated, and they're doing great work. But I was looking for somebody. With age comes wisdom. With wisdom comes good advice. So, again, not trying to throw any shade on our younger generations.
We value the younger generations, for sure.
I value them a lot. I was in Austin last week talking at the Young Republicans Defense Innovation Conference, and part of my panel that I was on was to talk about the intersection of industry, government, and academia, and how that's a three-sided triangle that can really move us forward, specifically in the defense space, if we all work together collaboratively. And like my assessment right now, instead of a triangle, it's more like a three-legged stool where what's government doing, what's industry doing, and then what's academia doing. I think we got to kind of even that out and have a better collaboration.
Getting back to my question about the political science thing, is there an out right now, either for the U.S. or Iran, that will allow either side to save face? Because from all indications, it does not appear that there is an out on either side unless one just completely agrees to capitulate, and that does not seem like that is going to happen. And you mentioned when you were a student of political science in the 80s. I was a student of political science.
I'm not that old, but I am old. I am that old, but no, it was the early 90s. But
I too was a political science student in the 80s, and my focus was international political science. And
mine
then
too.
The big outlier at the time was Latin America, because that was what kind of like where all the crazy stuff happened.
Right. Yeah,
that's not the case anymore.
It's not the case anymore, but on the backdrop of everything, you're dealing with history and culture, and so you've got a nation with it is a Republican Guard. You got a deep state, and which exists. Oh, by the way, it's not just Iran; it exists in every single country. There's a form of deep state. Look it up if you don't understand what that concept is.
Does it exist in the U.S.?
Of course it does. I listen to Deep State Radio, the actual podcast too. There's a form of bureaucracy that exists in order to kind of move, and sometimes that's good, right? If you got an irrational actor, it'll keep the kind of the trains on the line here. But with Iran specifically, you look at the history, you look at the culture, you look at the from their perspective, you look at the fact they've always been kind of the underdog, even in the Middle East too, right? So it's very irrational that they struck out against all their neighbors, but in their mind, that might be a rational act, because if you sow chaos, then you can kind of rise to the top as a proper actor. I mean, unfortunately, over the last weekend, we lost a number of soldiers, sailors, airmen. Well, I believe it was mostly soldiers, but service people, and a lot of them were wounded there too. Even my wife said, Jordan, why Jordan? I said, well, there's military bases out there. A lot of the American population doesn't realize how many bases the U.S. has a presence in across the U.S. and so across the Middle East. So yeah, I mean, it's a scary time right now. And how do you deal with somebody we consider irrational? And I guarantee when you look at it from their position, because watching some of these AI trolls out there on Instagram.
So there are a lot of AI-generated videos out there about what happened.
I shared one with you.
You did.
Yeah.
But we both had to determine whether or not that was real or fake. But there was one real one, at least one real one, that I had received from somebody, and that had been subsequently verified. But the AI ones, there was a kernel of truth, and there was a little bit of stuff that was true about them, but the video itself was fake. Yeah,
the actual video I saw, there was the actual attack, and it was even enhanced with AI. So that kind of got me thinking this weekend. I talked about the 5 domains of warfare: the maritime, the air, the land, and then about 5-6 years ago in military doctrine we added cyber and space. But this informational warfare that's going on. And then to see the amount of comments, especially on the AI generated one, that were both pro-Iranian and then pro-U.S. And it makes you wonder, because I'm in the tech space now, how much of that is automated bots and such, or just malactors internationally that are kind of pushing this stuff, and then our American population that actually believes it. So if you have an uninformed population, boy, you can get people riled up very, very quickly, and
that's a great point. Education is the best defense, right?
100%. Yeah, I mean, verify. I've told some relatives, hey, turn off the Fox News and the CNN and do some reading and a little bit of research. And as I told somebody last week, let's have a facts-based argument. Let's actually, stop the speculation, or at least identify that, hey, I'm speculating right now, and this is my opinion, advice, something based on fact. But there's a lot of people running around, clicking and scrolling, and I've actually had relatives over the last couple of years telling me that the majority of the news they get is from Instagram, which is scary.
Getting the majority of your news from any one source, I don't care what it is, I don't care if it's WOKV, is not a good thing to do, even though we try to be as objective as we possibly can. There's always an unintentional bias, and at best, and an intentional bias at worst.
Yeah.
And the people who with the intentional bias are spending lots of money to make you buy their brand of bread.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. So I did play, kind of thinking about the previous question you asked me. I was doing this mind, melt, my own head war game. What would you do with Iran? Can you
answer that after the break?
I can, 100%.
And so much to get to and so little time. But before the commercial break, you had teased us with what you would do about Iran.
Yeah, so I just did like this mental exercise. I was in Austin last week, like I mentioned, at this defense industrial based symposium. And it was just interesting just to think about, if you went all in, what would that look like? And then, as I mentioned on the break, I saw a map that I'm not sure where it generated from. There's some people saying it came from Israel. Others are saying it was just misinformation from the Iranians, showing an invasion force of the Kurdish out of the western mountains and towards Tehran, and then an Israeli airborne force coming in via air out of Israel, then the U.S. attacking out of the Persian Gulf. So it was interesting to kind of see that. But I was thinking about this beforehand. If you went all in, I mean, it'd have to be a bombing campaign, but there'd have to be boots on the ground. And I'm just not sure we're going to get there.
A lot of casualties if that happens.
Well, a lot of casualties. I mean, casualties are, hey, folks, I mean, warfare and casualties are not a new phenomenon. But I have said in the past, America likes their wars cheap, fast, and bloodless. So every casualty matters, whether they're wounded or killed in action, and we should never forget that. That means we need to have a good policy and a good strategy to ensure that we reduce the risk to our service members when they are in harm's way. But total destruction of Iran, or at least a capitulation of the IRGC, I think that would take a lot of force. I think they will not give up very easily, because from them or for them, this is an existential threat to their way of life and their regime, and they're not a small force. So that whole mental exercise of, how do we, have that level of destruction and have a form of capitulation would take a lot. But it's interesting. So last week when I was talking about the military-industrial base, we're already looking at our magazine depth, a term of how many rockets we have of Patriot missiles, how many capabilities do we have in unmanned systems, how many artillery shells, how many, you just name it, right? Because we've significantly reduced our military-industrial base since the end of the Cold War, to the point, even during the Ukraine war 2 years ago, we were moving artillery shells out of South Korea, our reserves out of South Korea, to the Ukraine. So we have a lot of investment we need to do in our military-industrial base in order to have that capacity. Even if we want to take over Iran and we needed a lot of combat power, that will take a lot for our nation to mobilize to do those things.
We have less than 30 seconds left, but that was one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, was
we can talk about it next week if you want.
Our readiness, our military readiness, and how that's affected. And, the next time you come on, does the Iran war come home? The IRGC has people in the United States in so-called sleeper cells.
Yeah.
So does it come home to the U.S. of A?
Potentially. So we'll hold it for next week when we'll put a pin in it. Let's just say, okay, this is going on right now, and say China says, hey, we're going to do something about Taiwan.